The greatest explorers in human history used no maps or compasses. They crossed the world's largest ocean by memory alone. This is the story of the Pacific Wayfinders, a civilization that mapped a water empire spanning millions of square miles using only the stars, the waves, and their own profound knowledge. By the end, you will understand how a science woven from oral tradition and observation achieved what seems impossible. How did navigators traverse thousands of miles of open sea to find specks of land without a single instrument? What does their success tell us about our own definitions of technology and intelligence? What forgotten forms of genius are we still overlooking today? Their accomplishment is framed by a space of water so immense it defies our land-based instincts. This was their world, a realm defined not by continents, but by the sea itself. Picture the Pacific Ocean, and within it, draw 3 points. To the north, the volcanic peaks of Hawaii. To the southwest, the mountainous islands of New Zealand, known to its indigenous people as Aotearoa. To the far southeast, the isolated, enigmatic statues of Rapa Nui, which we call Easter Island, connect these 3 distant points. The triangle you have just envisioned contains an area of ocean larger than all the continents on Earth combined. Within this watery expanse are thousands of islands, from towering archipelagos to solitary coral atolls, some no larger than a city block. This is the Polynesian Triangle. And every single island within it, from the largest to the most remote, was found, settled, and connected by people navigating without any of the tools we associate with exploration. They did this not in a single heroic age, but over the course of millennia, in a sustained campaign of discovery that stands as one of humanity's greatest adventures. While Europe was in its early Middle Ages, Polynesian voyagers were completing journeys across thousands of miles of open sea. They sailed against prevailing winds to find new homes, and they sailed back again to maintain ties between families separated by an ocean. They did so without a written language to preserve their maps, without a magnetic needle to point their way, and without the complex instruments that would later fill European captains' quarters. The technological gap seems unbridgeable. We look at their vessels, their tools, and see what they lacked. But to solve the mystery of their success, we must shift our perspective entirely. We must stop looking for the technology they did not have and start to see the profound, living science they carried in their minds, in their songs, and in their bones. This was a system of knowledge built from the ocean up, a way of seeing the world that turned the entire Pacific into a familiar, navigable highway. For centuries, Western scholars looked at the scattered islands of the Pacific and saw a puzzle they could not solve. The distances were simply too vast, the canoes too simple. The dominant explanation became one of accident, not achievement. They proposed that Polynesian islands were populated not by master navigators, but by lost fishermen, by families cast adrift in storms, helplessly drifting until they chanced upon land. This theory of accidental drift voyaging was not just an academic idea, it was a profound dismissal. It suggested that the greatest maritime migration in history was a series of lucky mistakes. This perspective was powerfully and publicly cemented in the mid-20th century by the Kon-Tiki expedition. Thor Heyerdahl, a Norwegian adventurer, built a primitive balsa wood raft and sailed it from South America to Polynesia. His goal was to prove that Polynesians could have originated from the Americas, arriving not as skilled sailors but as passive drifters on ocean currents. The expedition was a monumental feat of endurance and captured the world's imagination. But its central message was clear: the Pacific could be crossed by drifting, therefore, perhaps it always had been. The sophisticated oral histories of Polynesian people, which spoke of great navigators, star paths, and intentional two-way voyages, were relegated to myth. Their knowledge was not seen as science but as legend. This created a fundamental clash of perspectives, one that goes to the very heart of how we understand human capability. On one side was a view of the ocean as a terrifying, empty barrier. To cross it required the technological armor of the European age of sail, maps, compasses, sextants, and large ships. Without these tools, successful long-distance travel seemed impossible, so it was explained away as accidental. The ocean was a wall. On the other side was the Polynesian view, forged over thousands of years. Here, the ocean was not a barrier but a pathway. It was a vast, living text that could be read. Its currents were highways, its stars were signposts, its bird life was a moving map. This was not a story of technology conquering nature, but of knowledge harmonizing with it. The clash was not just about how people moved across the water, but about what constituted real intelligence, real science. For decades, the drift theory held sway in textbooks and the popular mind. The intentional voyaging traditions were fading, practiced by only a handful of elders. It seemed the true story might be lost forever, swallowed by the same ocean that had once been a familiar road. But a revolution was coming, one that would begin not with a new scientific instrument, but with the rediscovery of a very old way of seeing. The stage was set for a revival that would prove, beyond doubt, that the world's largest ocean had been mapped by the greatest navigators we have ever known. The clash of worldviews created a silence that lasted for generations. The drift theory was written into history books, while the living memory of the Pacific navigators was fading, kept alive by only a few elders in scattered island communities. It seemed the true story of the wayfinders might be lost beneath the waves of a modernizing world. But in the 1970s, a single voyage would shatter the old assumptions and ignite a cultural fire that still burns today. This was the voyage of the Hōkūleʻa. The name means Star of Gladness, and it was given to a double-hulled sailing canoe built not with ancient tools, but with modern materials and a very ancient purpose. A group of Hawaiian artists, sailors, and scholars had a radical idea. To prove that Polynesian navigation was intentional and sophisticated, they would not just write a paper, they would build a canoe using traditional designs and sail it the way their ancestors had from Hawaii to Tahiti, a journey of over 2,500 miles of open ocean. They would use no compass, no sextant, no charts. There was just one monumental problem. In Hawaii, the knowledge of how to do this had been lost. The star paths had not been sailed for centuries. The charts that held the sailing directions were fragments. The builders of the Hōkūleʻa could recreate the vessel, but they had no one who could navigate it. They needed a teacher, a master who still held the living knowledge. Their search led them across the Pacific to a small island in Micronesia called Satawul. There, they found a man named Mau Piailug. Mau was a PWO, a master navigator initiated in a sacred tradition of non-instrument wayfinding that stretched back countless generations. He could read the ocean as a book. He agreed to come to Hawaii and guide the Hōkūleʻa. For many of the young Hawaiian crew, this was their first real encounter with the depth of their own heritage. They were about to learn that the canoe was just the vehicle. The true technology was in Mau's mind. In the spring of 1976, the Hōkūleʻa set sail from Honolulu. The world watched with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. For 31 days, Mau Piailug stood watch, sleeping in short naps, his senses tuned to a symphony of natural signs. He steered by the rising and setting points of stars. He felt the subtle direction of swells beneath the hull. He watched the flight patterns of birds and the shapes of clouds on the horizon. The crew followed his every instruction, trusting in a knowledge system they were only beginning to comprehend. Then, on the 31st day, land appeared on the horizon exactly where Mau had predicted. They had reached Tahiti. The arrival was not just a nautical success, it was a cultural earthquake. Thousands of Tahitians paddled out in canoes to greet the Hōkūleʻa, many weeping with a powerful, unexpected emotion. For the first time in living memory, a traditional Polynesian vessel had completed a long-distance voyage under its own power, guided by traditional knowledge. It was a physical, undeniable proof that the ancestors were not drifters but brilliant, intentional explorers. The voyage of the Hōkūleʻa did more than settle an academic debate. It sparked a renaissance. It gave a new generation of Polynesians a profound source of pride and identity, showing them that their history was not one of accident, but of unparalleled achievement. It proved that the science of the Wayfinders was not a myth, but a real, replicable, and powerful way of knowing the world. Now the question became, how did Mau do it? What was the actual science behind this incredible feat of memory and perception? Mau Piailug's success was not magic, it was a mastery of perception. To understand it, we must abandon our map-based thinking completely. A wayfinder does not sail across an empty blue expanse hoping to bump into land. Instead, they sail through a dense forest of information. The ocean is not a void, it is a living, breathing text, and every element within it is a sentence, a paragraph, a chapter waiting to be read. This is the foundational philosophy, the cognitive shift that makes everything else possible. The navigator is not a conqueror of nature, but its most attentive student, embedded within the system they are trying to understand. At the heart of this system is a brilliant mental model called the Etak, or reference island system. Imagine you are sailing from one island to another, a journey that might take weeks. You cannot see your destination, and you have no GPS dot on a screen to show your progress. How do you know where you are? The Etak system solves this by creating a moving frame of reference. The navigator selects a third island, one that lies off to the side of their intended route. This island, though invisible over the horizon, is fixed in their mind. As the canoe moves forward, the navigator visualizes this reference island sliding backward, relative to the canoe's movement. It is as if the canoe is stationary, and the islands of the world are moving past it. The position of this mental reference island against the backdrop of the stars tells the navigator exactly how far they have traveled. It transforms an abstract journey across featureless water into a concrete, visualized progression. But this mental model is useless without the raw data to feed it. This is where the master observer comes in. The navigator's senses become their only instruments. They commit hundreds of stars to memory, not just as static points, but as moving bodies that rise and set in specific houses along the horizon, creating a celestial compass. When clouds obscure the stars, they read the ocean swells, the long, deep waves generated by distant weather systems. These swells maintain a constant direction for days, providing a steady, feelable rhythm under the hull. A seasoned navigator can lie down in the canoe and, with eyes closed, feel the direction of travel through the pattern of swell against the hull. They watch the sky. Certain cloud formations gather and linger over islands, betraying the presence of land dozens of miles away. They observe the birds. The flight patterns of terns and boobies at dusk reveal the direction to their nesting grounds. They note the color of the water, the types of floating debris, even the behavior of fish. A sudden gathering of predatory fish might indicate a shallow reef nearby. Every piece of data is cross-referenced, a constantly updating mental chart. This is not a collection of tips and tricks. It is a fully integrated science of observation, a way of thinking that sees relationships and patterns where the untrained eye sees only randomness. The mystery of the Wayfinders, then, is not solved by finding a hidden piece of technology. It is solved by recognizing a different kind of intelligence altogether, one built on deep memory, acute sensory perception, and a profound participatory connection to the natural world. They did not have a compass because they had the entire sky. They did not have a chart because they carried the map in their mind. This celestial map began with a simple, brilliant observation. For a wayfinder, the horizon is not a flat line. It is a circle divided into houses. Picture standing at the center of a great, invisible wheel laid flat upon the ocean. The rim of this wheel is the horizon all around you. Now, divide that rim into 32 or more equal segments, like the points on an ancient compass rose. Each of these segments is a house, and each house has a name, a history, and a family of stars assigned to it. These are not random stars. They are the ones that rise from that specific point on the horizon and travel in a predictable arc across the sky before setting at the opposite house. A master navigator did not just know a few constellations. They memorized the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of individual stars. When Mau Piailug looked east in the pre-dawn darkness, he was not seeing a random scattering of lights. He was reading a labeled directory. He knew that if a certain bright star was rising just to the left of a specific house, the canoe was pointing a few degrees too far south. The star itself became his steering mark, a luminous beacon fixed to a precise location on his mental wheel. But here is the critical complexity that turns memorization into a dynamic science. The sky is a clock. As the night progresses, the stars move. The star that rose in the east house at dusk will, hours later, be high overhead and eventually set in the west house. So the navigator must know the entire life cycle of each star, its path from cradle to grave across the dome of night. Furthermore, the night sky changes with the seasons. The star that marks your path to Tahiti in April is not the same star that will guide you home in October. The mental star compass is therefore a four-dimensional model, incorporating direction, time of night, and time of year into a single, fluid understanding. It is a living calendar and a compass fused into one. For maintaining a general east-west course, this system of rising and setting stars was enough. But for understanding north-south position, for knowing your latitude, the wayfinders used two great, unmoving anchors in the heavens. In the northern hemisphere, they relied on Polaris, the North Star, which hangs almost directly above the Earth's North Pole. Its height above the horizon tells you how far north you are. In the vast stretches of the Central and Southern Pacific, their most trusted guide was the Southern Cross. This small, bright constellation does not point directly to the South Celestial Pole, but by using its longer axis as a pointer and visualizing a specific empty spot in the sky nearby, navigators could locate true south. The angle of the cross above the horizon gave them their southern latitude. This means a master like Mau, standing on the deck of the Hōkūleʻa, could glance up at any clear moment and know not just the direction he was facing, but approximately how far he was from the equator. He was continuously fixing his position on the ocean's vast grid, using nothing but the ancient turning clockwork of the cosmos. This celestial knowledge formed the unwavering backbone of the journey, the constant reference against which all other, more fleeting signs were measured. Yet on cloudy nights when this primary system was hidden, the navigator's work was not over. It simply shifted to a different, more tactile sense, to reading the deep, rhythmic language of the sea itself. But the sky is not always clear and the stars vanish with the dawn. This is when the wayfinder's science shifts from the visual to the tactile, from reading light to reading motion. With the sun high and the horizon blank, the navigator turns to the most constant companions of any ocean voyage, the sun, the wind, and the deep, rhythmic pulse of the sea itself. The sun provides the most basic of daytime compasses. At the precise moments of sunrise and sunset, its position marks an undeniable east and west. A skilled navigator would note the exact point on the horizon where the sun emerged or disappeared, using it to reset his mental bearing for the day ahead. As the sun climbs, its path becomes less precise for steering, but its height and the length of the shadows it casts still offer clues about latitude and the progression of the day. Yet the sun is a fleeting marker and the wind can shift. For a true, unwavering reference, the wayfinder learned to listen to the ocean's deeper voice to feel the swell. This is perhaps the most subtle and profound skill in the entire navigational toolkit. The ocean surface is a chaotic mix of waves, from small, wind-driven ripples to large, rolling crests. But beneath this surface noise are the swells, immense, powerful waves generated by storms and steady wind patterns thousands of miles away. Unlike local waves, these swells march across the ocean in consistent, organized sets, maintaining their direction for days or even weeks. They are the ocean's steady heartbeat. To us on a boat, this might feel like simple rocking. To a master navigator like Mau Piailug, it was a precise directional gyroscope. He learned to distinguish the dominant swell from the clutter of smaller waves by the canoe's motion. He could lie down in the hull, close his eyes, and feel the specific pattern, the interval and the angle as the swell lifted and turned the vessel. By aligning the canoe's motion with this deep rhythm, he could maintain a course even on the blackest, starless night. It was navigation by kinesthetic sense, by feeling the planet's pulse through the wood of the canoe. The wind provided the final layer of this daytime symphony. Pacific wind patterns are remarkably consistent across seasons, forming great, predictable highways across the ocean. The trade winds, for instance, blow steadily from the northeast in the northern tropics and from the southeast in the southern tropics. Navigators memorized these patterns for their specific routes, knowing that a wind from a certain quarter at a certain time of year meant they were within a specific corridor of the sea. A sudden shift in wind direction or character could signal the approach of a weather system, or, more importantly, the presence of a distant island disrupting the airflow. Together, the sun's arc, the feel of the swell, and the voice of the wind created a redundant, interlocking guidance system. If one signal was ambiguous, another could confirm it. This was not guesswork, it was continuous, cross-referenced data analysis, performed by a human mind perfectly calibrated to its environment. Yet even with these celestial and oceanic guides, the most elusive target remained finding land itself, a tiny speck in 1,000,000 square miles of blue. For that final, critical act of discovery, the wayfinders turned to the most unexpected of scouts, the creatures that bridged the world of sea and the world of land. Land remained the ultimate prize, a destination hidden far beyond the curve of the world. To find it, the wayfinder became a master of indirect evidence, learning to read the subtle signatures that land imprinted upon the sea and sky from dozens, even hundreds of miles away. This was the ecological dimension of their science, a profound understanding that an island is not just a point on a map, but a living system that radiates clues into the ocean around it. The most reliable of these biological scouts were the seabirds. A navigator watched not just for birds, but for specific species with known behaviors. The white tern, for instance, is a small, graceful fisher that must return to land each night to roost. Spotting one of these birds in the afternoon was a powerful sign, but its behavior was the real message. If the bird was flying in a purposeful, straight line, it was heading directly to its home island. By noting its flight path at dusk, a navigator could simply turn his canoe to follow. Other birds, like the booby, range farther out to sea but still maintain a connection to land. Their flight patterns in the evening, often circling before choosing a direction, could indicate an island lay within a certain radius. The presence and behavior of these avian guides transformed empty ocean into a mapped territory with invisible, beating wings. Above the birds, the sky itself bent to the presence of land. An island, especially a high, volcanic one, interrupts the smooth flow of the atmosphere. Moist air is forced upward over its slopes, cooling and condensing into clouds that tend to gather and linger in a fixed position, even when the wind blows other clouds past. Navigators looked for these stationary cloud formations, noting their distinctive shape and color. A greenish tint reflected in the underside of a cloud could mean it was hovering over a shallow coral lagoon, the waters you mirrored in the sky. This was not a vague hope, it was a practiced meteorological observation, a way of seeing the ghostly imprint of an island painted on the clouds. But perhaps the most mysterious and debated of all these natural signs is a phenomenon known in some traditions as tilapa, often translated as underwater lightning. Elders describe it as faint, rhythmic flashes of light deep beneath the surface, like distant lightning or the sparkle of bioluminescence. But with a crucial difference, these flashes appear to streak in a consistent direction, pointing like an arrow toward the nearest landmass. Modern science has yet to fully explain tilapa. Some researchers suggest it could be the refraction of light waves over submerged reefs, or perhaps a form of deep-sea bioluminescence triggered by the pressure waves from distant shorelines. For the navigators who trusted it, it was a real and reliable sign, a luminous thread in the dark deep pulling them toward home. Even the composition of the ocean itself changed as one neared land. The watercolor shifted from the deep indigo of the open ocean to the lighter blues and greens of shallower shelves. Certain types of driftwood or vegetation, specific to island shores, would appear. Predatory fish might gather, indicating nearby reefs where smaller prey hid. Every piece of data, from the flight of a single bird to the tint of a cloud, was a pixel in a gradually resolving picture. The wayfinder did not simply stumble upon land. They watched it emerge from the ocean's patterns long before it broke the horizon, assembling its presence from 100 scattered clues. This hyper-observant state reveals the final, beautiful truth of their craft. It was not a technique imposed upon the natural world, but a deep, participatory conversation with it. The navigator's mind was the processor, and the entire Pacific was the sensor array. The most astonishing tool in the Wayfinder's kit was not a physical object, but a model built entirely in the mind. To navigate without instruments, you must solve one core problem. How do you know where you are when there is nothing to see? The answer lies in a continuous, meticulous process of mental calculation known as dead reckoning. At its simplest, dead reckoning is the art of keeping track of your position by constantly updating your estimated movement. From the moment the canoe leaves shore, the navigator begins an unbroken internal calculation. He estimates the canoe's speed by the feel of the wind and the sound of the water against the hull. He holds the steering direction firmly in his mind, compensating for leeway, the sideways push of the wind. He tracks the passage of time by the sun's journey or the progression of star houses across the night sky. Speed, direction, and time, these three variables are multiplied together in his thoughts, hour after hour, day after day, to produce a running estimate of distance traveled. It is a living, breathing calculation that never stops, a constant narrative of motion. A single error in this mental log, a misjudgment of current or a forgotten shift in the wind, compounds over time, potentially leading the canoe into empty ocean. The pressure to maintain this flawless internal record for weeks on end is almost unimaginable, yet for the master navigator, this was just the baseline. Dead reckoning gave him a line on an imaginary chart, but to truly fix his position, he needed a more sophisticated system of mental geometry. This is where the genius of the Etak system comes into play. Etak is often described as a conceptual island moving backward, but that is a simplification. In reality, it is a dynamic, relational model of the entire seascape. Here is how it worked. Before a voyage, the navigator would memorize not just his destination, but a series of islands that lay along or near his route. At the start of the journey, he would select one of these islands as his reference point, his Etak. He would then fix this island's position in his mind, not relative to the moving canoe, but relative to the stars. As the canoe sailed forward toward its target, the navigator would visualize this reference island not as staying behind him, but as sliding backward along the horizon, passing beneath different star bearings. The canoe, in his mind's eye, remained the still center of the universe. The world moved around it, the segment of the journey between one star bearing and the next for the reference island was called an Etak leg. Completing an Etak leg told him he had traveled a specific, known distance. It transformed an abstract calculation of miles into a concrete, visual milestone. Think of it not as a map but as a star-based odometer. He was not looking at a picture of the ocean. He was feeling his way through a web of known relationships between places and the heavens. This mental model required a staggering feat of spatial memory and abstract thought. The navigator had to hold multiple moving parts in his head simultaneously: the real canoe on the real sea, the static star compass overhead, and the imagined, sliding position of islands that were far beyond the horizon. He was performing real-time, three-dimensional trigonometry without numbers or diagrams, using only memory, perception, and a deeply internalized sense of cosmic geometry. This was the true heart of their science, a cognitive technology so advanced that it allowed them to construct a reliable map of the Pacific, not on parchment, but in the living theater of the human mind. With this internal chart guiding them, the final challenge was the vessel itself, the engineering marvel that made such profound mental journeys physically possible. Yet the most brilliant mental map is useless without a ship. The vessel of the Pacific Wayfinders was not a passive raft for drift voyaging, but a masterpiece of maritime engineering, a machine perfectly adapted to its purpose. This was the double-hulled voyaging canoe, known in Hawaii as the Hōkūleʻa and across Polynesia as the Vaka. At first glance, it might seem simple, but its design is a profound statement of philosophy. It was built not for conquering the ocean, but for connecting with it. Two long, slender hulls, carved from massive tree trunks or painstakingly plank-built, were lashed together with strong crossbeams, creating a stable platform. This catamaran design provided incredible stability in open ocean swells, preventing the dangerous rolling of a single-hulled ship. The space between the hulls was often decked over, creating a large, flat platform for shelter, supplies, and the precious cargo of plants, animals, and families seeking new homes. This was not a warship designed to carry cannon, but an ark designed to carry life and community across thousands of miles. Its technological sophistication becomes clear in the details. The entire structure was lashed together with miles of braided coconut fiber cordage, not nailed or pegged. This might seem primitive, but it was a stroke of genius. A lashed joint is flexible, allowing the canoe to twist and flex with the powerful forces of the sea, absorbing stress that would shatter a rigid, nailed frame. The canoe moved with the ocean, not against it. Above this resilient platform rose the iconic crab claw sail, a soaring, asymmetrical triangle of woven pandanus leaves. Its shape was aerodynamically brilliant, allowing the canoe to sail remarkably close to the wind, a critical ability when your destination often lay upwind. European square-rigged ships of the same era were essentially pushed downwind by the breeze, but a Polynesian voyaging canoe could tack, zigzagging against the wind to reach islands that seemed unreachable. This design was not an accident. It was the product of countless generations of observation, experimentation, and refinement passed down through oral tradition. The contrast with European vessels is stark. A European ship was a sealed wooden world with decks and cabins that isolated the crew from the sea. They navigated from inside a chart room, relying on instruments that mediated their experience. The Polynesian canoe was an open platform. The navigator stood or sat at the stern, fully exposed. He felt the spray, tasted the wind, saw the full sweep of the horizon, and felt every shift in the swell directly through the soles of his feet. This constant, immersive sensory contact was not a hardship. It was essential. It was the primary data stream for his entire navigational method. The canoe was not just transportation, it was an extension of the navigator's own senses, a living interface between human intelligence and the ocean's language. To build and sail such a vessel required a deep communal knowledge, a society organized around the sacred task of voyaging. The canoe was a vessel of wood and sail, but the true vessel of knowledge was the navigator himself. In a society without a written word, the immense library of star paths, ocean currents, and island sequences had to be carried in living memory, passed from one mind to the next across the generations. This was not casual folklore, it was a rigorous, formal science of memory, safeguarded by a sacred and demanding tradition. The master navigator, known as a PWO in Micronesia or a kahuna hōkūleʻa in Hawaii, was far more than a skilled sailor. He was a living library, a walking database of the Pacific. His mind held not just facts, but a dynamic, relational model of the entire ocean, a cognitive map that took a lifetime to build. To become a PWO was to undergo one of the most demanding intellectual apprenticeships in human history. A young boy from a navigator lineage would begin his training as a child, first by listening, then by memorizing. The education was immersive and total, woven into the fabric of daily life. He learned the names and movements of hundreds of stars. He memorized the feel and direction of ocean swells from every quadrant. He internalized long lists of islands in their correct sailing order, along with the specific bird, cloud, and wave signs that marked their approaches. This vast catalog of information was not stored as a dry mental list. It was encoded into the very culture, transformed into tools for remembering that were both beautiful and functional. Primary mnemonic devices were chants and songs. Complex navigational sequences were set to rhythm and melody, turning a technical sailing direction into a memorable verse. A chant might describe the journey from one island to another by naming the star that rises as you leave, the star that guides you through the night, and the star that sets as you arrive, all woven into a poetic story about the ancestors. These chants were rhythmic anchors, their beats and cadences helping to lock sequences in place. Stories and myths served a similar purpose. A legend about a hero chasing a great fish across the sea might secretly encode the star path to a distant archipelago. The narrative provided a vivid, emotional scaffold upon which dry navigational data could be hung and recalled. In some parts of Polynesia, there is also intriguing, though less documented, evidence of physical mnemonic aids, like intricate knotted cord systems reminiscent of the Inca quipu. These cords, with their patterns of knots and colors, may have been used to record genealogies, voyage sequences, or astronomical cycles, serving as a tactile prompt for the oral recitation held in the navigator's mind. The final stage of this education was a sacred initiation, a ceremony that often involved tests of knowledge and endurance. This rite of passage did more than certify skill, it solemnized the responsibility. The new PWO understood he was now a guardian of a knowledge system essential to the survival and identity of his people. He was the link between the ancestors who had found the islands and the generations who would come after. This formal, protected structure ensured the knowledge's integrity, preventing corruption or loss through casual transmission. It was a system designed for perfect recall under immense pressure, ensuring that a navigator, alone on a dark ocean, could access a flawless mental chart built from the songs of his teachers. This raises a profound question about the nature of knowledge itself. If the map exists only in living memory, what happens when the chain of memory is broken? The navigator's knowledge was a sacred trust, but it served a purpose far greater than personal glory. We must shift our lens now from the mechanics of the journey to its meaning. Why would entire communities risk everything on these immense ocean voyages? This was not aimless wandering or desperate flight. Polynesian voyaging was a deliberate, sophisticated system of movement with clear, life-sustaining goals. At its most fundamental level, voyaging was about survival and renewal. Islands are finite ecosystems. A growing population, a drought, or a conflict over resources could make an island feel too small. In these times, the ocean was not a barrier but a solution, a highway to new possibilities. A chief, guided by his navigator, might dispatch a canoe carrying families, rooted shoots of taro and breadfruit, and breeding pairs of pigs and chickens. This was a planned migration, an intentional transplanting of an entire way of life to a new whenua, a new land. They sailed not as refugees but as pioneers, carrying their world with them to seed another. But voyaging was not only about finding new homes, it was also about maintaining the old ones. The Pacific was a web, not a collection of isolated dots. Canoes traveled on regular, seasonal circuits for trade, moving essential goods that islands lacked. An atoll with abundant coconuts and fish, but no stone would trade for basalt from a high volcanic island, a rock crucial for making adzes and other tools. Volcanic glass, ideal for sharp cutting edges, was another prized commodity carried across hundreds of miles. This exchange was practical economics, a way of balancing the resources of the sea. Voyaging was also a tool of politics and connection. A powerful chief might send a fleet to distant islands to forge alliances, signaled by the exchange of ceremonial gifts. More poignantly, canoes traveled to sustain kinship. Families separated by the original migration would maintain ties across generations. Marriages were arranged, stories and news were shared, and genealogies were updated. The ocean highway kept the social fabric of a scattered people intact. This points to the deepest layer of meaning, the philosophical foundation. In many Polynesian worldviews, the land and sea, the aina or whenua, are not merely resources but living ancestors. The ocean is the pathway that connects all family members, both living and past. To voyage, therefore, was not an act of conquering a wilderness, but of walking the pathways of one's own genealogy. It was a way to honor and sustain the relationship with the broader family of islands. Each journey reaffirmed that they belonged to a vast, interconnected realm, a single community dispersed across the water. The canoe was a stitch in that grand tapestry. So when a navigator set a course by the stars, he was doing more than finding an island. He might be leading his people to a new beginning, securing a vital tool for his village, strengthening a political bond, or simply visiting a cousin. He was performing an act of cultural continuity, using the highest science of his people to fulfill the most human of needs: connection, sustenance, and belonging. This purposeful network of voyages created something extraordinary, a maritime empire of memory and meaning that lasted for centuries. Yet this entire civilization of connection faced a threat it could not have foreseen, a collision with a world that moved to a completely different rhythm. This grand narrative of connection unfolded over millennia, a slow and deliberate unfurling across the world's greatest ocean. To understand the scale of their achievement, we need to trace the voyage of an entire civilization, step by step, island by island. The story begins not in the Polynesian Triangle, but to its west, among the islands of the Bismarck Archipelago near New Guinea. Here, around 1,500 years before the Common Era, a culture archaeologists call the Lapita people began to move. We know them by their distinctive, finely decorated pottery, a signature that acts like a breadcrumb trail across the map. They were master sailors and horticulturalists, carrying with them a package of life: taro, yams, bananas, pigs, chickens, and dogs. Sailing eastward into the unknown, they reached the islands of Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. This region, now called Western Polynesia, became their new homeland for a very long time. For nearly 2,000 years, there was a pause, a period of consolidation and cultural development. This was not a failure of nerve or skill. Think of it instead as a necessary incubation. In these rich islands, the unique Polynesian language, culture, and social structures crystallized. The voyaging canoe technology was refined. The vast, empty ocean to the east was not forgotten, but it required a new level of preparation. The descendants of the Lapita were becoming the Polynesians. Then, around the year 300 of the Common Era, something extraordinary happened. The long pause ended with a breathtaking burst of exploration. This era is sometimes called the Polynesian Void, not because it was empty of people, but because they filled it so rapidly. From the hubs of Western Polynesia, canoes began striking out into the Great Eastern Ocean. They reached the Cook Islands and the Society Islands, including Tahiti. They pushed north to the Marquesas, a rugged and beautiful archipelago that would become a crucial secondary launching point. From these new centers, the expansion accelerated in all directions. To the north, navigators made the immense journey to the Hawaiian Islands, a voyage of over 2,500 miles from the Marquesas. To the southeast, they found Rapa Nui, Easter Island, one of the most isolated places on Earth. And to the southwest, they made the epic voyage to Aotearoa, New Zealand, a land of temperate climates utterly different from the tropical islands they left behind. Within just a few centuries, the Polynesian Triangle was complete. This was not a slow drift, it was a purposeful explosion of discovery. The patterns of this expansion reveal the strategic genius behind it. Scholars debate the precise models, but two ideas help us see the intent. The first is the stepping stone model. Navigators would find and settle an island group, then use it as a new base for the next leap. The Marquesas acted as a central stepping stone for voyages north to Hawaii and southeast to Easter Island. The second, more revealing model is the exploratory sweep. Imagine a canoe setting out from a known island like Tahiti. Instead of sailing downwind, where the trip is easiest but the return might be impossible, they would deliberately sail into the prevailing easterly trade winds. This was a stroke of profound strategy. If they found nothing, they could turn and run swiftly downwind back home, using the wind that had been in their face as a reliable tailwind for a safe return. But if they found a new land, they had already proven they could sail back against the wind to bring news of its location. This practice turns the old idea of accidental discovery completely on its head. It was a method of calculated risk, a way of exploring that always kept a pathway home open. It demonstrates that these were not desperate castaways, but master strategists conducting repeatable, scientific missions of colonization. They were painting their world onto a mental map, one intentional, windward voyage at a time, creating the historical canvas upon which every navigational feat was later performed. The most audacious test of this system came at its easternmost frontier, far beyond the familiar clusters of tropical islands, where the ocean stretches into a vast, lonely expanse, lies Rapa Nui, the island we call Easter Island. It stands as one of the most isolated pieces of inhabited land on the planet, over 1,200 miles from its nearest neighbor, Pitcairn Island, and 2,300 miles from the coast of South America. To reach it, a voyaging canoe would have had to sail into a void with no stepping stones for reassurance, guided only by stars, swells, and the profound faith in their navigator's knowledge. For a long time, Western scholars viewed the settlement of Rapa Nui as the ultimate accident, the definitive proof of the drift theory. They argued that a canoe must have been blown hopelessly off course, its occupants landing by sheer luck on this remote speck, then trapped forever with no way to return. It was framed as a story of isolation and mystery, culminating in the famous Maui statues. But the oral traditions of Rapa Nui itself tell a different story. They speak of a founding ancestor, Hōkūleʻa, who arrived intentionally with a colonizing party in great canoes, bringing the plants and animals needed to start a new life. This was not a tale of desperate survivors, but of planned migration. Which narrative fits the evidence? The ecological history of the island shows that the Polynesian settlers did indeed arrive with a classic transplant package, including chickens, taro, and the Polynesian rat. This suggests preparation, not a panicked shipwreck. Furthermore, the voyage from the Marquesas or the Gambier Islands, while immensely long, follows a known pattern. Navigators would have sailed southeast with the prevailing wind and current, a direct if daunting route. The return voyage against the wind would have been far more difficult, perhaps explaining why contact with the Polynesian homeland may have been lost over time. The settlement of Rapa Nui stands as a powerful testament not to luck, but to the extreme range of the voyaging system. It represents the outer limit of their exploratory courage, a deliberate push into the unknown to find and claim a new home, however remote. But the story of the eastern frontier does not end at the shoreline of Rapa Nui. There is compelling evidence that the long arm of Polynesian voyaging may have stretched even farther, reaching the continental coast of South America. The most famous piece of this evidence is a humble tuber, the sweet potato, known as kumara in Maori and kuamala in some other Polynesian languages. Its native home is the Andes Mountains of South America. Yet it was a staple crop across Polynesia long before European contact. How did it cross thousands of miles of ocean? The prevailing currents and winds make a natural drift from South America to Polynesia highly unlikely. The more logical explanation is that Polynesian voyagers, perhaps from Rapa Nui or the Marquesas, reached the South American coast, encountered the sweet potato, and recognized its value as a hardy, nutritious food for long voyages. They would have taken cuttings, the living plants that were always carried in their canoes, and successfully transported them back across the sea. This was not a random transfer, it was an act of deliberate agricultural exchange. Recent archaeological studies have added another layer. Chicken bones found at a site in Chile, dating to a period before Spanish arrival, show a genetic link to Polynesian chickens, not European ones. While this finding is still debated, it aligns with the sweet potato data, pointing toward a pre-Columbian trans-Pacific connection. These clues suggest that the final chapters of Polynesian expansion may include voyages of contact and return, brief meetings between the greatest ocean explorers and the civilizations of the Andes. It means the Polynesian Triangle was not a closed loop, but a network whose outermost threads may have brushed against another world. This possibility reframes their entire endeavor. It was not just about finding empty islands to settle, but about exploring the full breadth of their oceanic world, pushing their knowledge to its absolute limits, and sometimes bringing a piece of a new continent back home. The sweet potato's journey hints at voyages of contact, but the Polynesian expansion also turned decisively south, into a realm of cooler waters and unfamiliar skies. Their destination was a land of staggering scale, a place they would call Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, known to us as New Zealand. This was no small coral atoll. Here, the voyagers encountered a world unlike any they had known before, a temperate archipelago with snow-capped mountains, vast forests, and a climate that demanded a complete reimagining of their tropical way of life. The discovery of this massive landmass stands as the ultimate testament to the adaptability and sheer reach of their navigational science. Traditional accounts speak of the legendary navigator Kupe, who, according to many Maori narratives, was the first to make the immense journey from the ancestral homeland of Hawaiʻi. The stories tell of his pursuit of a great octopus across the ocean, a chase that led him to the shores of this new, mist-shrouded land. After exploring its coasts, Kupe is said to have returned to Hawaiʻi, bringing detailed descriptions of the route and the new country. This account is crucial, for it frames the discovery not as a one-way trip of exile, but as a successful mission of exploration with a deliberate return. It suggests a navigational system robust enough not just to find new land, but to chart a reliable round trip across nearly 2,000 miles of open ocean. The voyage itself presented unique challenges that pushed their methods to the limit. Sailing south from central Polynesia meant leaving the familiar band of tropical trade winds and entering the changeable, often stormy weather patterns of the temperate latitudes. The star compass they relied on would have shifted, with familiar guide stars sinking lower on the horizon and new southern constellations rising higher. Perhaps the most profound shift was the loss of key biological signposts. The navigator scanning for land would not find the reliable white terns or boobies of the tropics. Instead, they learned to read new clues like the migratory patterns of certain birds or the distinctive cloud formations that gather over Aotearoa's massive alpine ranges. When the first canoes made landfall, the work of wayfinding was far from over. The settlers faced the monumental task of adapting their tropical transplant package to a cooler world. Taro and breadfruit would not thrive in the south. Through generations of experimentation and deep observation, they identified native plants like the fern root and cultivated new strains of the sweet potato, the kumara, that could survive the frosts. They learned to utilize the enormous forests for building and the rich fisheries of the cooler waters. This was not a failure of their original knowledge, but its brilliant extension, applying the same principles of observation and adaptation that guided their ships to the task of building a new life on a new Earth. The traditions of the Great Fleet, which speak of multiple canoes arriving in a coordinated migration period, underscore the intentional nature of this settlement. Whether viewed as historical fact or as a powerful metaphor for the various waves of migration, these stories emphasize that the peopling of Aotearoa was a deliberate, community-wide endeavor. It required the transport of people, plants, animals, and the entirety of their cultural knowledge across an ocean highway they had mastered. The maintained connection to Hawaiʻi in oral history, the memory of a pathway back, reinforces that these voyagers were not lost. They were pioneers who knew exactly where they had come from, and their navigators held the mental map to prove it. This southward expansion reveals a system so flexible it could map a continent, and a culture so resilient it could build a new world under a different sun. The northern apex of the Polynesian Triangle presented a target of breathtaking precision. To reach the Hawaiian Islands, a voyaging canoe had to sail more than 2,500 miles north from the Marquesas or the Society Islands, a journey that took navigators out of the steady trade wind belt and into the variable winds and currents of the North Pacific. This was not a journey into empty ocean, but a search for a needle in a watery haystack, a chain of high volcanic islands that, from a distance, would appear as nothing more than a faint smudge of cloud on the horizon. The navigational challenge here was one of supreme accuracy. A miscalculation of a few degrees in course, or a failure to account for the northward push of the equatorial current, could mean sailing past the entire archipelago into the endless blue. Finding Hawaii required holding a true course for weeks, guided by stars that rose and set in new patterns as they traveled north, and trusting in the subtle signs that land was near. The sweet potato, the uala, again provides a crucial clue. Its presence in ancient Hawaiian fields tells us that the settlers arrived with the full Polynesian transplant package, a deliberate act of colonization. Linguistic and cultural evidence points strongly to the Marquesas Islands as a primary homeland, with likely later contact from the Society Islands as well. This was not a single, one-time accident. The oral histories speak of multiple return voyages, a period of sustained two-way travel between Hawaii and the ancestral homelands to the south, known collectively as kahiki. These voyages would have been essential for exchanging knowledge, securing new marriage alliances, and maintaining the vital cultural and genealogical threads across the ocean highway. For a time, Hawaii remained a connected part of the Polynesian world. Then, for reasons still debated by historians, the long-distance voyages ceased. The ocean highway fell silent. Isolated in the heart of the Pacific, Hawaiian culture began its own distinctive evolution. The settlers adapted their tropical knowledge to these new islands, developing sophisticated aquaculture in fish ponds, creating new forms of copper cloth from the local wok plant, and building a complex social and religious system deeply tied to the land, the Aina. The stories of the great navigators like Ma'aika and Pau were preserved in chant and genealogy, not as myth but as history. Their isolation became a crucible, forging a unique culture, yet the memory of their origins across the sea remained a central pillar of their identity. The settlement of Hawaii stands as the final, brilliant point in the triangle, proving that the wayfinders could not only find a speck of land in a vast ocean, but could do so with such consistency that they could establish and maintain a living bridge between worlds. Yet this magnificent era of two-way voyaging did not last forever. Across the vast Polynesian world, the long-distance ocean highways gradually fell silent, centuries before the first European sails appeared on the horizon. This period of contraction is one of the great quiet mysteries of Pacific history. Why would a people who had mastered the ocean, whose very identity was woven from voyages of connection, choose to stop sailing the great routes between islands? The answer is not a single event, but a convergence of powerful, practical forces that reshaped life across the Pacific. One of the most immediate constraints was ecological. Building a great voyaging canoe required immense resources, most critically, a massive, straight tree for the hull. On lush, high islands like Tahiti or the Marquesas, this was possible. But on smaller islands or on islands that had been settled for many generations, the largest trees were eventually harvested. Once those giant specimens were gone, they could take centuries to regrow. The very success of colonization could, over time, undermine the means of maintaining the connections that colonization had created. Without the raw material for new canoes, the physical thread of the long-distance network began to fray. At the same time, the societies that had been planted on new shores were maturing and turning inward. In places like Aotearoa and Hawaii, the settlers found lands of such immense size and ecological diversity that they became self-sufficient worlds unto themselves. In New Zealand, they developed entirely new technologies to work the temperate forests and fisheries. In Hawaii, they engineered intricate systems of taro terraces and saltwater fish ponds that could support large, complex populations. The urgent need to trade for essential resources diminished. Why risk the immense danger of a months-long voyage to acquire stone or tools when your own islands provided everything your community needed to thrive? Political energy, once directed outward toward exploration and alliance building, turned toward managing the affairs of the home islands. Rival chiefs competed for control of local resources and prestige, their ambitions focused on the land they could see, not the distant homelands remembered in chants. Some researchers also point to the possibility of a changing climate. Shifts in prevailing wind patterns, perhaps during a period like the Little Ice Age, could have made the long windward voyages back to central Polynesia even more difficult and dangerous, effectively lengthening the distance between communities. The ocean highway itself may have become a less reliable road. This combination of resource limitation, local success, and perhaps environmental change created a powerful pull toward isolation. It was not that the knowledge of navigation was forgotten overnight, but its practice on the grand scale became unnecessary, and then, over generations, it became rare. The great chants and star paths were still taught, but they began to refer more to a glorious past than to a practical present. This period of contraction adds a crucial layer of complexity to the story. It shows that the voyaging tradition was not a static, golden age that simply ended. It was a dynamic, living system that responded to the changing realities of the people who sustained it. The decision to stay was not a failure of knowledge or courage, but often a sign of success, a choice to invest in the new world they had found. The ocean pathways faded from use, but they were never erased from memory. They slept in the chance, waiting for a time when their meaning would need to be awakened once more. The knowledge of the Wayfinders was a living flame, and for a time it burned in only a few places. One of its last and greatest keepers was a man from a small coral island named Satawul, in what is now the Federated States of Micronesia. His name was Mau Piailug. From a very young age, Mau was chosen. He was not just taught to sail, he was sculpted into a PWO, a master navigator, through one of the most demanding intellectual and spiritual initiations on Earth. The PWO ceremony was the culmination of decades of study, a sacred rite that wove together deep knowledge with profound responsibility. Under the guidance of his grandfather and other elders, Mau memorized the star compass, the swell patterns, and the signposts for islands across a vast section of the Pacific. This was not mere data transfer, it was the careful, ritualized passing of a torch. To become a PWO was to become a living library for your people, a guardian of the pathways that meant survival, connection, and identity. The title came with a solemn understanding. This knowledge was not for personal fame or wealth. It was a sacred trust to be used for the community's well-being. For years, Mau practiced this art as it had been practiced for centuries, guiding canoes across open ocean for fishing, trade, and ceremony among the Central Caroline Islands. He lived within the tradition, its last fully initiated practitioner in his region. But as the 20th century progressed, Mau watched this world unravel. The younger generation was drawn to outboard motors and Western education. The deep, demanding knowledge of non-instrument navigation seemed like a relic, a difficult skill with no place in a modernizing world. The living flame was guttering, threatening to go out forever. This realization brought a deep personal conflict. The PWO tradition was secretive and protected, meant to be passed only within certain lineages after rigorous training. To share it broadly, especially with outsiders, went against the protocols that had preserved it for so long. Yet Mau faced a painful choice: follow the old rules and watch the knowledge die with him, or break protocol to give it a chance to live in a new form. His decision was an act of courageous, visionary generosity. When the builders of the Hōkūleʻa, Hawaiians eager to reclaim their own voyaging heritage, came to him in the 1970s and asked for his help, he said yes. He saw in their sincere longing a spark that could reignite the fire. By agreeing to navigate their canoe to Tahiti using only the ancient ways, and by later teaching a new generation of Hawaiian sailors, Mau performed the ultimate act of stewardship. He understood that for knowledge to survive, it sometimes must travel beyond its traditional walls. He became a bridge, not just across an ocean, but across a chasm of time and cultural loss. In doing so, he transformed from a master of a single tradition into a hero for an entire Pacific Renaissance. He ensured that the map of the ocean, held for so long in solitary minds, would be copied into many hearts, securing its journey into the future. Mau Piailug's gift did not end with a single successful voyage. The Hōkūleʻa's arrival in Tahiti was a spark that landed on dry tinder, igniting a cultural fire that spread from island to island with breathtaking speed. Suddenly, the ancient chants were not just stories about the past, they were blueprints for the future. Across Polynesia, communities looked at their own histories with new eyes and asked a powerful question: if they could do it, why can't we? This was the beginning of the Polynesian voyaging renaissance, a movement that transformed memory into motion. In Hawaii, the success led to the building of new double-hulled canoes, like the Hauʻailoa and the Makali, each project becoming a community endeavor that taught young people not just woodworking and sailing, but pride and identity. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, the tradition of waka aoyua, or ocean-going canoes, was revived, reconnecting Maori with their epic migration narratives. In Tahiti, the Cook Islands, and beyond, new voyaging societies emerged, building their own vessels and training a new generation of navigators under both Maus students and their own resurgent knowledge holders. The ocean highways, silent for centuries, began to hum with life once more. This was not a nostalgic reenactment, it was a living, evolving practice. Modern materials like fiberglass and synthetic rope were often used alongside traditional designs, a pragmatic choice that ensured the knowledge could survive and spread. The goal was not historical purity, but cultural continuity, using the best of today to keep the wisdom of yesterday alive for tomorrow. The most profound testament to this evolution began in 2014, when the Hōkūleʻa embarked on a journey that would have been unthinkable 40 years earlier, a circumnavigation of the entire planet. This was not a stunt to prove a point, the point had already been proven. This worldwide voyage had a deeper purpose, to spread a message called Malama Honua, which means to care for our island Earth. The crew, a rotating family of navigators, sailors, teachers, and scientists from across the Pacific and the world, sailed over 40,000 nautical miles. They visited 23 countries and over 100 ports, from the bustling docks of New York City to the remote shores of Mozambique. Everywhere they went, they did not come as conquerors or discoverers, but as humble guests, sharing stories of the wayfinders and listening to the local wisdom of how people cared for their own lands and waters. They met with scientists discussing climate change, with schoolchildren planting gardens, with indigenous leaders protecting forests. The canoe became a floating classroom and a sacred meeting space, demonstrating that the ancient principle of reading nature's signs is the very same skill we need to navigate our planet's future. The voyage showed that the tradition was not locked in the past, but was a dynamic framework for addressing modern global challenges. When the Hōkūleʻa returned home to Hawaii in 2017, it completed a circle far greater than a path around the globe. It closed a loop of meaning, proving that the wisdom which once mapped an ocean empire could now help us chart a course for a sustainable world. The canoe was no longer just a vessel of exploration. It had become a symbol of unity and responsibility, a small wooden needle stitching a tapestry of global consciousness. The legacy of the Hōkūleʻa is a clear answer to anyone who might see traditional knowledge as a relic. It is a living, breathing, and urgently relevant science for our time. For centuries, this profound tactile skill existed outside the language of Western science, an art passed down through touch and tradition. Yet in recent decades, oceanographers and researchers have begun to listen, using modern instruments to measure what the navigators have always felt. Their findings are not just validating the tradition, they are revealing a hidden layer of order in the ocean's chaos. The deep ocean swells that guided Mau Piailug are not random. They are generated by massive, stable wind systems and storms that can rage for weeks thousands of miles away. These swells travel in organized sets, like the steady breath of the planet, and their direction can remain constant for astonishing distances. Satellite data and ocean buoy networks now map these pulse lines across the Pacific, confirming that a navigator feeling a dominant swell from the northeast could trust it as a reliable compass for days on end. The science quantifies the consistency that the tradition knew intuitively. Even more compelling are the experiments that put the art to the test. Researchers have taken modern sailors, even seasoned ones, placed them blindfolded on boats in open water, and asked them to point to the direction of travel using only the motion of the hull. Most fail, overwhelmed by the confusing jumble of local waves. But when the same test is given to a traditionally trained wayfinder, the results are startling. They can consistently identify the direction of the primary swell with remarkable accuracy, often within a few degrees. They are filtering the signal from the noise through a sensitivity honed over a lifetime of practice. This is not a mystical sense, it is a refined perceptual skill, akin to a master musician picking out a single violin's note in a symphony. Science can measure the swell, but it cannot grant the deep, embodied knowing that turns that measurement into a navigational certainty. The validation extends beyond open ocean steering to the very act of finding land. Traditional knowledge speaks of feeling the presence of an island through changes in the sea's rhythm long before it is seen. Modern oceanographic modeling shows why this is possible. When a deep ocean swell encounters a large island or archipelago, it doesn't just pass by. The landmass acts like a rock in a stream, disrupting the smooth flow of energy. Part of the swell is blocked, creating a shadow of calmer water downwind. Another part wraps around the island, bending and creating an interference pattern. These disruptions form a kind of wave wake that can extend for 50 miles or more from the island's shores. To a navigator tuned to the ocean's pulse, this area of confused, cross-cutting swell patterns is a clear announcement, a textured signature in the water saying, "Land is near." The science maps the phenomenon, giving us the physics behind the perception. This convergence of knowledge systems is where true understanding deepens. The empirical data does not replace the traditional art. It builds a bridge of credibility across a cultural divide. It translates the navigator's felt truth into a language the modern world is conditioned to accept. This external validation is powerful, but it also invites a humbling perspective. Western science, with its satellites and models, is now documenting a complex environmental relationship that Pacific cultures have understood and utilized for over 1,000 years. The navigators were not just using nature, they were participating in a deep dialogue with it, reading a living text that we are only now learning to decode with our instruments. This partnership between ancient perception and modern measurement does more than confirm history. It offers a new lens for understanding our planet, reminding us that some of the most sophisticated sciences are those written not in equations, but in the human capacity to listen to the world. The ocean's language was written not in books, but in neural pathways. To truly grasp the wayfinder's genius, we must venture beyond the stars and swells into the very architecture of the human mind. Cognitive science now offers a fascinating lens through which to view this ancient art, suggesting that mastering non-instrument navigation doesn't just fill the mind with knowledge, it physically reshapes the brain itself. Consider the famous study of London taxi drivers. To earn their license, these drivers must memorize the city's entire labyrinthine street map, a feat known as the knowledge. Brain scans revealed that successfully completing this training actually enlarges the hippocampus, the brain's central hub for spatial memory and navigation. The mental effort of building a detailed, dynamic cognitive map literally grows the neural real estate dedicated to that task. It is compelling to consider that a master navigator like Mau Piailug, whose mental model encompassed an entire ocean, likely underwent a similar, perhaps even more profound, neural transformation. His hippocampus wasn't just storing a street grid, it was holding a living, four-dimensional model of the Pacific, with moving stars, shifting swells, and sliding islands. This suggests that the Wayfinder's expertise represents a pinnacle of a specific human cognitive potential, a form of intelligence cultivated to an extraordinary degree through rigorous, lifelong training. This intelligence is fundamentally different from our modern, map-based navigation. When we use a GPS, we outsource our spatial reasoning to a device. We follow turn-by-turn instructions, but we often fail to build a coherent mental picture of the journey. Our relationship to space becomes passive and abstract. The Wayfinder's knowledge, however, is the epitome of what philosophers and scientists call embodied cognition. This is the idea that understanding is not a detached, purely mental process, but is rooted in the body's physical interaction with the world. For the navigator, knowledge was not just seen, it was felt. The direction of travel was understood through the pressure of the swell against the hull, the tension in the steering paddle, the taste of the wind. The star compass was not a diagram but a dome of sky he physically occupied. His cognition was situated, embedded directly within the environment he was trying to understand. He didn't have a map, he was a living part of the map. This creates a powerful contrast with the Western navigational tradition that eventually reached the Pacific. European explorers relied on a series of abstractions. They reduced the living ocean to lines of latitude and longitude on a parchment chart. They translated the sun's arc into mathematical calculations with a sextant. Their tools created a layer of mediation between the sailor and the sea. Both systems achieved incredible feats of discovery, but they represent two distinct paths of human ingenuity. One externalized knowledge into instruments and symbols, the other internalized knowledge into the senses and memory. Recognizing this does not diminish either tradition, but it forces us to expand our definition of what intelligence and technology can look like. The Wayfinders developed a science of the senses, a technology of memory, and a system of observation so refined that it allowed them to perceive the planet's rhythms in ways our instruments are only now confirming. Their legacy challenges a narrow, material view of progress. It asks us to consider what other forms of profound human understanding we might be overlooking in our rush to digitize and automate every facet of experience. What other ancient wisdoms, encoded in practice and perception rather than in textbooks, hold solutions to the complex problems we face today? The Pacific was not a placid highway, but a realm of profound and shifting uncertainty. For all its brilliance, the Wayfinder's art was not an infallible magic, but a sophisticated science of probability, a constant negotiation with an ocean that could hide its secrets for weeks. It provided direction and a high likelihood of success, but never the pinpoint certainty of a modern GPS coordinate blinking on a screen. This acceptance of risk was woven into the very fabric of the tradition, a sober understanding that elevated their achievements from mere luck to the realm of courageous, calculated exploration. Think of their mental map not as a single line, but as a widening cone of possibility. A navigator knew that if he held a course by a specific star for a certain number of days, he would enter a zone where the target island should lie. This zone might be 50 miles wide or even 100. Within that zone, his other skills took over, reading the cloud formations, the bird life, and the ocean's subtle signatures to zero in on the final destination. It was a two-stage process: long-distance dead reckoning to get you into the neighborhood, and hyper-acute local observation to find the front door. This meant there was always a margin for error, a buffer of ocean where doubt could creep in. The system was designed to manage that doubt, not eliminate it. The ocean itself could actively conspire to erase the navigator's guides. Overcast nights were a profound test, blotting out the celestial compass for days at a time. In these periods, the navigator fell back entirely on the feel of the swell, a skill requiring immense concentration. But what if a storm passed through, churning the sea into a chaotic jumble of conflicting waves? The deep, steady swell pattern, his gyroscope, could be temporarily masked or distorted. He would then have to rely on the wind's direction and his own impeccable sense of time and speed, holding his course on faith until the sky cleared and the ocean's deep rhythm reasserted itself. These were periods of intense strain, where the mental model in his head was the only reality, completely disconnected from the visual references of the world around him. Beyond the environmental challenges lay the immense psychological weight of the voyage. For weeks, the navigator was the sole keeper of the course, the only person aboard who truly knew where they were, or more precisely, where he believed them to be. There was no external confirmation, no passing ship, no landmark. Every sunrise over an empty horizon was a quiet test of his conviction. The well-being of his entire crew, their families waiting at home, and the future of their mission rested on the accuracy of his continuous, silent calculations. This burden required a mind of extraordinary resilience, a calm center in a universe of blue uncertainty. The training of a PWO was as much about forging this mental fortitude as it was about memorizing star paths. And yes, some voyages did not find land. The oral traditions and genealogies acknowledge this reality, not as shameful failures, but as part of the cost of exploration. A canoe might sail beyond the range of its supplies, or a navigator might succumb to illness, leaving the crew adrift. These lost voyages were remembered and mourned, their stories serving as sober lessons about preparation, respect for the ocean, and the limits of even the most refined knowledge. This acknowledgement is crucial, for it reveals a mature and honest relationship with the unknown. The Polynesian expansion was not a guaranteed, effortless procession. It was a story of triumph built upon a foundation of accepted risk, where the courage to set out was matched by a clear-eyed understanding that the ocean did not always give up its islands easily. This balance between supreme skill and acknowledged uncertainty is what makes their story so human and so deeply impressive. They did not possess an impossible perfection. Instead, they developed a robust, resilient system that maximized their chances in an unforgiving environment, a system that could absorb setbacks, adapt to lost information, and still, more often than not, guide a canoe laden with life to a new shore. Their legacy is not one of never being lost, but of knowing with profound sophistication how to find their way again. This acceptance of the unknown leads us to a final, haunting question about the very origins of their journey, a mystery that lies not in the techniques of navigation, but in the deepest wellspring of human motivation. The revival of voyaging was not a simple homecoming. While Mau Piailug's gift was profound, it arrived across a deep cultural divide. He was Micronesian from Satawal, a keeper of the PWO tradition with its own sacred protocols and secret knowledge. The Hawaiians who built the Hōkūleʻa were Polynesian, reconnecting with a voyaging heritage that had been dormant for generations. This meeting of cultures, though filled with mutual respect, was not without friction. Mau's teachings came from a specific, tightly held lineage where knowledge was earned through years of disciplined apprenticeship and protected by strict rules about sharing. For some in his community, his decision to teach outsiders, even other Pacific Islanders, was seen as a breach of sacred trust. In Hawaii, eager students had to learn not just the techniques, but the entire philosophical and spiritual context that made those techniques meaningful. This sometimes led to misunderstandings, a clash between the need for rapid revival and the slow, respectful pace of traditional learning. The process forced difficult questions about ownership and authenticity. Whose tradition was this now? The initial journey, while triumphant, carried this subtle undercurrent of cultural negotiation, a reminder that reawakening an ancient art involves more than rebuilding a canoe. It requires rebuilding relationships and respect. As the movement grew, new complexities emerged on the modern shoreline. The powerful image of the voyaging canoe, so rich with symbolism, was incredibly attractive. Soon, corporate logos began to appear on canoe hulls for sponsorship. Voyaging themes were used in tourism marketing, and elements of the sacred star compass found their way into commercial art, sometimes without deep understanding or permission. This commercialization risked turning a profound spiritual practice into a brand, a logo stripped of its deeper meaning. For many practitioners, this felt like a new form of appropriation, where the outward form of their heritage was celebrated while the inner, demanding discipline was overlooked. The challenge became how to share this treasure with the world to build understanding, without letting the world cheapen it. How do you teach a sacred science in a university classroom or a public workshop when its original power came from years of intimate, often secret, mentorship? The navigators and cultural leaders involved in the Renaissance have been navigating these modern currents with great care. They work to create educational protocols that honor the sacredness of the knowledge, often requiring students to participate in cultural practices, learn the language, and demonstrate genuine commitment before accessing the deeper teachings. The goal is to prevent the knowledge from becoming just another academic subject, to keep its heart beating with the rhythm of the ocean it describes. The remarkable outcome of this difficult journey is a strengthened Pan-Pacific identity. What began with tension has blossomed into a powerful network of solidarity. The shared act of voyaging, of facing the ocean with the same tools as the ancestors, has created bonds between island nations that transcend colonial borders. A Hawaiian navigator can now sit with a Cook Islander and a Maori sailor, and they all speak the common language of the star compass. They share stories of swells and bird signs, recognizing their knowledge as different branches of the same great tree. This has fostered an incredible cultural pride, not as isolated communities, but as members of a vast, ocean-based civilization that achieved the impossible. Young people across the Pacific now grow up seeing the voyaging canoes not as relics in a museum, but as living vessels piloted by their own cousins and uncles, a direct link to a heroic past that is actively shaping their future. The Renaissance has shown that cultural revival is never a simple return to a frozen past. It is a dynamic, sometimes contentious, process of adaptation. It requires navigating the complex waters of intellectual property, commercialization, and intercultural respect with the same skill once used to navigate by the stars. The true destination of this modern voyage was not just a physical island, but a renewed sense of who they are together across the world's greatest ocean. The ancient art of wayfinding offers a powerful map for our modern world, not just of oceans, but of our relationship with the planet itself. At its core, this was a science of deep, attentive relationship. The navigator's survival depended on reading subtle signs, understanding patterns, and recognizing that every element, from the flight of a bird to the shape of a cloud, was part of a connected, living system. This fostered a worldview of profound interconnectedness, where the ocean was not a separate space to be crossed, but a relative, a pathway that bound all islands and all people together. You did not command this world, you listened to it. You were a participant in a constant, respectful dialogue. This stands in stark contrast to a more extractive mindset that emerged much later, one that views the ocean as a void, a mere surface to travel over, a resource to be harvested, or even a dump for what we no longer want. In that view, the sea is passive, empty, and separate from us. The wayfinder knew it to be alive, full of meaning, and intimately tied to their own existence. This fundamental difference in perception dictates how we act. If you see the world as a collection of resources, you take. If you see it as a network of relationships, you care for it. This is the powerful bridge between ancient skill and modern urgency. The contemporary mission of the voyaging canoes, encapsulated in the Hawaiian phrase "malama honua," means to care for our island Earth. This is not a vague slogan, it is the direct, logical outcome of the Wayfinder's philosophy. You cannot truly care for something you do not intimately know. The navigators spent lifetimes learning to read the ocean's health, its currents, its moods. Today, that same principle of deep knowing is applied to the planet's vital signs, its changing climate, its polluted waters, its declining biodiversity. The modern voyagers who sail the Hōkūleʻa around the globe are practicing this applied philosophy. They go not as tourists but as listeners, sharing stories of ancestral respect for nature and gathering stories of local stewardship from every port. They demonstrate that the very act of paying close attention, of learning to read the subtle signals of environmental distress, is the first and most crucial step toward healing. The canoe becomes a classroom where the old lesson is taught anew. To navigate the future, we must first learn to read the world with the same humility, precision, and reverence as the wayfinders who mapped the stars. The story of the Pacific Wayfinders is not a closed book but an open investigation. For all we have learned, the map of their past is still being drawn, with new discoveries constantly challenging and refining our understanding. Scholars today are not just studying history, they are actively solving a multi-layered puzzle, using tools the original navigators could never have imagined. One of the most vibrant debate centers on the precise timeline and sequence of settlement. Did the Great Migration unfold in a steady wave or in rapid bursts? Did Hawaii truly come before Aotearoa, or were there multiple, overlapping pulses of exploration? These are not just academic questions, they are keys to understanding the motivations and capabilities of the voyagers themselves. To answer them, researchers are turning to a form of evidence written not in chance, but in genetic code. By analyzing the DNA of modern Polynesian populations and comparing it to ancient remains, scientists can trace lineage and migration patterns with incredible precision. They are even following the genetic trails of fellow travelers, like the Pacific rat and the transported crops, whose own journeys are locked in their cells, providing an independent record of when and where people moved. This biological detective work helps to cross-check and calibrate the rich oral histories, creating a more complete picture of the past. On the ground, archaeologists are engaged in a meticulous search for the physical footprints of the voyaging era. They scour coastlines and dig carefully into ancient village sites, hoping to find the remnants of early settlements, the distinctive Lapita pottery that acts as a cultural signature, or the Holy Grail, preserved pieces of a voyaging canoe itself. Finding a canoe hull or lashing would be a monumental discovery, offering direct evidence of construction techniques and travel routes. Each shard of evidence, from a stone adze sourced to a distant island to a layer of charcoal from an ancient cooking fire, adds another data point to the grand narrative. Meanwhile, linguists are performing a different kind of excavation, digging into the very structure of language. By comparing words for common items, navigational terms, and social concepts across the many Polynesian languages, they can reconstruct a family tree of human movement. The patterns of linguistic change and borrowing reveal which islands remained in contact longest, and which paths of communication faded first, tracing the ghostly outlines of the ancient ocean highways on a chart of spoken words. Perhaps the most tantalizing frontier of all this research lies beyond the Polynesian Triangle, in the ongoing search for evidence of contact with the Americas. The sweet potatoes journey is a compelling clue, but the quest is for more. Are there Polynesian loanwords hidden in indigenous South American languages? Could there be archaeological evidence, however faint, of a temporary Polynesian presence on the continent's western shores, or of Andean materials making the return voyage to the islands? Each potential find is scrutinized and debated, for it would rewrite not just Polynesian history, but the story of the entire pre-Columbian world. This vibrant, multidisciplinary effort means the legacy of the Wayfinders is not static. It is a living conversation between past and present, where chants, stars, and stories are now joined by genomes, soil layers, and phonetic shifts. Every new finding, whether it confirms a tradition or reveals an unexpected turn, deepens our awe for what was accomplished. It reminds us that the greatest explorations are never truly over. They simply await the next generation of seekers, ready to read the signs in new ways. Their journey reveals a core principle far more revolutionary than any single star path or canoe design. At its heart, Polynesian wayfinding was a rigorous, empirical science, a systematic method of observation, hypothesis testing, and memory. But it was a science of an entirely different kind. It was not conducted in a laboratory or a chart room, separated from its subject by glass and instruments. It was an embodied science, a knowledge system where the human body and mind were the primary research tools, fully immersed in the phenomenon they sought to understand. The navigator did not look at a compass, he felt direction in the swell against his skin. He did not calculate latitude from a sextant's reading, he saw it in the angle of the Southern Cross above the horizon. His entire being was the instrument, calibrated over a lifetime to perceive the subtle dialogues between wind, water, and sky. This created a holistic intelligence where navigation was inseparable from ecology, astronomy, meteorology, and even spirituality. You could not be a master of the stars without also being a master of bird behavior, cloud physics, and ocean currents, because in this system they were all part of the same living text. This stands in profound contrast to the model of exploration that would later arrive in the Pacific from Europe. The European age of discovery was built on a philosophy of separation. The navigator used tools, a compass, an astrolabe, later a sextant, to measure a world from which he was increasingly insulated. He worked inside a wooden hull, interpreting numbers and angles on dials to plot lines on a parchment chart. The environment became data to be collected, processed, and abstracted. This was an incredible technological achievement, but it created a distance, a layer of mediation between the sailor and the sea. The ocean was no longer a teacher to be listened to, but a problem to be solved with mathematics and mechanics. Both systems achieved epic voyages, but they represent two fundamentally different relationships with knowledge and the natural world. One sought to internalize the environment into the human sensorium. The other sought to externalize understanding into portable tools and universal symbols. This is why the Polynesian achievement forces us to completely redefine what we consider advanced technology and sophisticated science. We are conditioned to see progress as a march toward greater complexity in our gadgets, toward more powerful tools that stand between us and the raw world. The Wayfinders present a compelling alternative, a pinnacle of human development where the most advanced tool was the cultivated human being. Their technology was not built from metal and glass, but from memory, perception, and a deeply literate relationship with their environment. It was a technology of attention. This environmental literacy, this ability to read a complex system through direct, nuanced observation, may be one of the most vital forms of intelligence we have ever developed. In an age of climate crisis and ecological disconnect, their legacy asks us a pressing question: what have we lost by outsourcing so much of our perception to devices? And what might we regain by learning, once again, to see the world not as a collection of resources to manage from a distance, but as a living, speaking system of which we are an inseparable part? The true map they left behind is not of the Pacific, but of a different way to be human in a vast and knowing world. So the true legacy of the Polynesian Wayfinders is not simply that they crossed an ocean, but that they mastered it through a completely different kind of genius. Their achievement stands as one of humanity's most brilliant demonstrations of adaptation, a testament to what becomes possible when a culture dedicates itself to listening to the world with absolute attention. They built a complete science from the integration of stars, swells, and signs, a system where the sky was their compass, the ocean's pulse their gyroscope, and the flight of a bird their map. This was all held within a cognitive framework of immense sophistication, a mental model of the Pacific that lived and breathed in memory and song. It was a technology of the mind, honed over generations into a perfect instrument for reading the planet. This story is far more than a historical curiosity. It is a powerful narrative of cultural resilience, a proof that knowledge can survive in living memory across centuries, even when the physical voyages paused. It is a profound model for sustainable interaction with the natural world, showing that deep success comes not from dominating an environment, but from learning its language and moving in harmony with its rhythms. Most importantly, it is a direct and elegant challenge to historical narratives that have long undervalued oral tradition and indigenous knowledge, dismissing them as myth or luck. The Wayfinders force us to expand our very definition of what science and technology can be, to recognize that intelligence is not measured by the complexity of our tools, but by the depth of our understanding. As we look at our own world, saturated with digital maps and instant positioning, their legacy asks us a quiet, essential question. In our rush to outsource navigation to satellites and calculation to devices, what other forms of profound, embodied knowledge are we allowing to fade? What ancient wisdoms, what subtle ways of reading the land, the sky, or the sea still exist in the memories of elders and the practices of communities, waiting to be recognized not as folklore but as vital science? The voyage of the Hōkūleʻa and the revival it inspired show that this knowledge is not lost but sleeping, and it can be reawakened with respect and dedication. Their story invites us to become wayfinders in our own right, not of the Pacific but of perspective, to support the preservation of such intangible cultural heritage, to listen to those who hold different ways of knowing, and to remember that the greatest maps are sometimes the ones we carry inside, written in the stars we choose to follow.